to relate tenths and hundredths. This is just going to be an introduction to it. We'll get further into adding them, not really subtracting them, but just adding them when we got tenths and hundredths, making sure that we can make the connection. But I want to give you guys a solid foundation first, so that when we move forward to the more concrete math, that you guys will be able to go through and work it out and use the strategies that we're learning today. All right, so we'll start with our spotlight on vocabulary, which is our next slide. Spotlight on vocabulary. First of all, the tenth is the digit in the first place value after the decimal. The hundredths is the digit on the second place value after the decimal, and the whole is the digits in the front of the decimal. So if you go ahead and we're going to look at an example, and when we look at the example, we'll see the tenths. Here's the decimal place. The first digit after the decimal is my tenths place. The second digit after my decimal is the hundredths place. We won't get into the thousandth place in fourth grade. You'll get into the thousandths place in fifth grade. But so today we're only going to focus on the tenth and the hundredth. I don't want you guys to confuse these with the tens and the hundreds, but the tenth. And the reason that the TH is on the back is because it lets me know that it's a decimal and it's the first place behind the decimal. Okay, so we're going to make some connections, and this is going to be our concrete part where we're really going to build and understand it. So when we're going with our making connections, all of this we're going to relate our decimals to money, and then we're going to relate it using base 10 blocks. Alright, we know in the base 10 block, this will be considered a whole. It's a flat, but it's a whole. Alright, because this is 100. There's 100 parts in this whole. When we're considering money, this would be one whole dollar. It is very imperative that we understand that this being a whole and this being a whole. In this dollar, there are 100 pennies that make this dollar. In this flat whole right here, there are 100 units or 100 ones that make this a whole. That's how these two are connected. Now when we move forward, we have a long, and the long of course has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10. And this is going to also, when we go with money, this is going to be equivalent to a dime. All right? Here is the 10, here is the 10, so this is why these equivalent. In $1, which is a whole, there are 100 pennies. In my flat, there are 100 units or 100 parts. And to make my dollar a whole is 10 dimes, and to make this flat a whole is 10 longs. All right? And then we will move to the last one, which is the unit cube, and then a penny. It takes me 100 pennies to give me this whole dollar. It takes me 100 units to give me this whole right here. So we can go ahead and make sure that we understand this connection. Everything else is going to be smooth sailing. Okay, now I want to make sure that we have a very good understanding of how they are the same. If we look here first, we can see this is broken down into tenths. All right, and with it being broken down into tenths, this has 10 equal parts in the whole. So with it having 10 equal parts in the whole, this basically is my dimes. How many dimes do I have? I have 3 dimes, so this is going to go, my 3 is going to go in the tenths place. Since it's 100 here, I'm going to look at how many are shaded in out of my whole 100. That lets me know I'm going to the 100th place because I'm looking at the picture, or I'm looking at the grid, and I'm seeing how many parts in my whole. It's 100 parts in my whole, and I shaded in 30. So that's where this 30 comes from, because it's 30 pennies or 30 ones. These 3 tenths or 3 dimes is the same as 30 pennies or 30 ones. So if you look here, it is taking up the same amount of space. So these 2 decimals are in fact equivalent. And it's the same thing when we're looking at tenths. This over here, in this whole, we have 10 parts in the whole. And I like this model better because it's showing it vertically, and we can really see that it's the same. So in this part right here, this is my whole. It has 10 equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And in my 10 parts is 6 shaded. Since it's tenths, it's 6 tenths. And that's where I got my 6 tenths or 6 dimes. Now if I transition dimes into pennies, that's going to give me how many pennies ends up making 1 dime 10. So how many pennies are going to end up making 60 cents? is going to be 60 pennies. So here, this is a whole, but this is now broken down into units or ones. So in order to make these two equivalent, I got to shade in 60 ones that will be equivalent to 6 tens. All right, so this is an example of our whole group exploration. The grid represents how much of the project Jordan finished. We want to write it as a decimal, and then we're going to write it as a fraction. So now when I look at this right here, this is my whole. In my whole, I have to see how many parts. And I'm going to do the decimal one, the fraction one first. Since this is my whole, and I'm looking at these, I know that in this whole, or in this flat, there are 100 parts. Right? Since there are 100 parts, I want to know how many are shaded in that 100. This row will give me 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and this is 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, and 79. So that's going to give me 79 hundredths. And the reason that I didn't count one by one is because I should know that a full row is equivalent to 10. So now I have 79 hundredths as my fraction. I want to write it as a decimal. I can see right now that I don't have any holes. And why I don't have any holes? Because the whole thing is not shaded in. So that lets me know I have no holes. And now all I'm going to do is really just write this as money. Since this is in the 10th place, I'll put it in the 10th place. And since this right here is basically representing my pennies or my ones, I'm going to put it in the hundredths place. So 79 hundredths is also equivalent to 79 hundredths, or 79 cents if we were doing it into money. All right, this is another example of whole group exploration. We're saying use the grid to create two fractions and two decimals. So we're going to just go ahead and label this A, and we'll label this B. Now, looking at this one is different from the one that we just did because this whole right here is broken into tenths. And how do I know it's broken into tenths? Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It has 10 equal parts. So I'm going to put my denominator as 10. How many are shaded here? Simple. That's 2. So this fraction represents 2 tenths. Now when I'm going ahead and I'm going to make it into a decimal, I can see that the whole thing is not shaded in. So instead of putting a 0 this time, I'm going to just leave it blank. I'm not going to put anything there because 0 and nothing, of course, leaving it blank is equivalent. Now I'm in the first place value after my decimal, which is the 10th place. How many tenths do I have? I got 2. Do I have any hundredths? And we know hundreds is when we start to break it into ones. I don't have any hundredths. So I can leave it like this, leave it just like this as far as just being 2 tenths, or I can create it where it's 0 and 20 because the 2 tenths is equivalent to 20 cents. And we'll do the same thing over here with this one. I have a whole. How many parts are in my whole? It's 10. Now I'm going to count the shaded area. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's going to give me 7 tenths. And if I'm trying to write this in decimal form, I'm going to move it over. I'm going to put my decimal. I don't have any holes. And now my first spot after the decimal point is my tenths place. How many tenths do I have? I have 7 tenths. Now, when I'm using the grid, and this is a grid, and we'll see some of this as well when we're moving forward, because they'll give us the information in context, and then they'll give us the information using the grid. Here, I want to use the grid to give me this right here. And I got to read this in decimal form. So to read in decimal form, it really goes back to us harboring on a place value. This is the holes. I don't have any holes. The first place value after the decimal is the tenths. I don't have any tenths, so that means this whole thing won't be shaded in. But now I have 7 hundredths. This grid right here is already broken into hundredths, so all I want to do is go ahead and shade in 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That's going to give me my 7 hundredths. I'll note that this grid fits because I'm looking at the place value. That's why we really have to harbor in or hone in on the place value. Now I want to go ahead and change this to create an equivalent fraction, a fraction that's equivalent to this. Again, this is my whole, so how many parts are in this whole? In this whole, there are 100 units. So 100 is going to be my denominator. How many did we shade in? We shaded in 7. So 7 hundredths is equivalent to 0.07.